Welcome back. We're so pleased to host this next session because this topic is critically important, yet often overlooked in our DEI conversations. It's estimated that about 15% of the world's population experiences some form of disability, many of whom have no outward sign of their condition. Disability does not discriminate. It affects all sorts of people, and it's the only diversity category that you can enter in at any time of your life. Today's panel will share the stories of four, we're going to start off with two, we're missing two students, but four students who have disabilities and discuss how we must go beyond merely providing access and shift to creating a culture of acceptance. Please welcome our moderator, Katie Fields. Katie is a Webster alumna and works as the College Outreach Coordinator for Starcloth Disability Institute. Our Webster student panel, Katrina Osley and Garrett Dolke. Hopefully later joining us will be Kayla Gaskill and Gabby Gilby. Let's give them a warm welcome.
So I'd like to begin the conversation, prior to starting this panel with acknowledging that March 1st is Disability Day of Mourning. And that day is where the disability community comes together to remember the victims of filicide, so individuals with disabilities being murdered at the hands of their parents and caregivers. More than 650 individuals with disabilities have died by filicide over the last 6 years. So I really think it's important for us to acknowledge this and to recognize that fear, shame, exclusion really is the enemy, and that accessibility, disability pride, acceptance, this is the remedy. And so this is how we create a culture of acceptance. So I'm really glad to be here today, joined by wonderful panelists. So to kick off the panel, please introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit about your interests, your goals, and your disability identity.
Okay, hi, my name is Katarina Osley. I am a third-year college student, and I'm in the psychology department, and I'm on the pre-law track, which is pretty exciting. And I have an invisible disability. I'm pretty open about it, honestly. I'm diagnosed bipolar, GAD, and ADHD, so I have a lot on my plate in addition to school and work. I do work in the first-year experience department, which is fantastic, and I love being part of that here at Webster.
So my name is Garrett Dolke. I am a third-year student here at Webster. I am majoring in sports communication. I am also the president of the Webster forensics team here at Webster. In terms of disability, I like to kind of start off by saying I have neurofibromatosis type 1, which in of itself does not make me disabled, but associated with it, I have autism spectrum disorder, ADHD, learning disabilities, epilepsy, and then aside from NF itself, I have depression, anxiety, stuff like that. So,
thank you. What are some common misconceptions people have about your disabilities?
I would say a really common one that I think sometimes people don't realize is especially little comments like, everybody's a little ADHD. Oh, everybody's a little bit bipolar. And I think people mitigate how substantial it is in my everyday life and how my everyday life is controlled by my illness. Not necessarily where it runs my life, but it's a big part of who I am and how I take on each day. So by saying little comments like that, I think people show that they don't understand what it means and they don't validate people's experiences.
Absolutely, great point.
yeah, I would say very similar. I think, the idea that, everyone is a little ADHD or everyone, or everyone has anxiety or everyone, and that's not to, mitigate any of the feelings that other people have, but I think especially for people who do experience, ADHD or do experience, depression, anxiety, mental health issues like that, I think it kind of takes away from your individual experience, and it's like, I know for myself, I lose sleep at night over some of this stuff, and so, I don't know if they're quite thinking about, some of the other things that are impacted
Right.
away from that.
Because it's a part of our identity, right? It's not something that we can separate ourselves from, and it's something that impacts us every day, 24/7, 7 days a week. And so I think for some people, it really feels like it's just something they bring up when they're having a challenging time, but this is a part of our identity, absolutely. Discrimination and ableism, while often unintentional, cause a lot of harm to disabled people. Have you guys experienced ableism before? And can you talk a little bit about that experience?
100%. I mean, there's a lot of different things I could touch on, but I think one of the biggest challenges I especially deal with every day is dealing with ableism that's kind of built into the school system, especially. A lot of professors, I'm in the psychology department, so I think this is very important to keep that in mind, is a lot of professors say that all absences are equal. If you have a doctor's appointment, just schedule it some other time. There is no excuse for you to miss, and unfortunately, my therapist and my psychiatrist do not work on those hours. They don't revolve around school, and it's still part of my necessary medical care. Because, in courses that are in my degree program, we talk about how medicine is not the only way to help mental illness. You have to use multiple methods. And by saying that, therapy doesn't count as a, reasonable absence, by saying that you should just schedule your appointment some other time is really hard to do because the rest of the world doesn't revolve around my school life, so I do have to choose classes that allow me to have days off just so I can go to my appointments, and that does exclude me from taking some classes I really want to do.
And I'm just curious, how could your professors respond differently to you to make that a better experience for you?
I think not just me, but as a whole, it should be, acknowledged that it's okay to, miss once or twice a month if you have to go to an appointment, because, just because you're out of high school and out of elementary school doesn't mean that, doctor's appointment times don't change. A lot of office hours are when a lot of the core classes happen, and you don't have a choice of if there's a course required for your major to take it at another time. And especially, I participate and I do try really hard in my classes, so it is really hard to feel like my teachers don't acknowledge that, and I don't want to miss class.
Yeah.
And I think it should be one of those things where teachers look at attendance policies as a whole. If you're participating and you are showing that you really do want to be there, but you have, an absence that you can't avoid, I think that shouldn't be viewed as something negative against, me in class.
Absolutely. And Garrett, what about you?
So for me, I would say overall I've been pretty fortunate and haven't had many experiences with that, but I think I have had some experiences in the forms of, I guess the word would be implicit ableism, or ableism that they're not really acknowledging that they're going through. I'm in the SOC, and I can, overall every professor has been great in terms of accommodations that I have and whatnot. But obviously in the SOC you do a lot of presentations, you do a lot of public speaking, and I'm of course on the forensics team as well. And so in terms of you can see me kind of fiddling with things right now. Sometimes getting marked down on presentations or something because you're fiddling with your hands, or you're doing self-soothing, and a lot of that is stuff that I don't even know I'm doing, and it's stuff that's subconscious and stuff that really is impossible to control. Mm-hmm. And so I think sometimes you get marked down on a speech or on a presentation or something because you were swaying your hands or you were moving your fingers in a weird way. And so a lot of times that's stuff that you really can't control. And then when you see that as part of the reason why you in class got 3 points marked off, or that's why you got ranked down in a prelim for a speech event, you take that in a way that's that's something I can't control. And so I think, obviously I know nonverbals and all that are a part of public speaking, giving presentations, but was it that distracting that you could not understand the bulk of what I was saying in my presentation? Was it that distracting that the presentation could not stand as it was? And so I think a lot of times I take a lot of that, personally, because, it's something that I think I can control, but then, all of a sudden it's on everything, and then it's it's just something that is almost physically impossible to control. I either have to, put my mind to not doing it, and then that can result in, not doing well on the actual content of a presentation or or whatnot. So I think that's probably been the highest form that I've experienced of some of those, ideas that it's, they're not even really thinking about how it could impact someone who really can't control that.
Right. And how does it impact you? Like, what does the experience of ableism do to you?
I would say it just, really makes me feel bad, and I just get down on myself, because I think, it's like a lot of times, once the grade's in, it's not really going to get changed, it's not, and so it's just like, I feel like I could have done something different, but it's a constant battle with myself that it's like, no, like, this is just how you are, and you have to, accept that and embrace that, but then it's like, well, I could have just not done it. But then it goes back to, just kind of that kind of constant cycle.
And what about you, Katarina?
I think, dealing with that everyday ableism really gives me a lot of imposter syndrome.
Yes.
Especially, I'm just as capable as any other student, but when you do have a lot more challenges, sometimes you tend to overthink of, can I actually go after the dreams I want to do? Right. Because you feel like, sometimes I take like 3 steps forward, but I can't control, when my illness decides to sometimes get a little worse. And so then you start to second guess yourself and be like, can I do this? Am I good enough for this? And I think that's a big part of, feeling that sometimes my peers, the education system doesn't support you, is because at times you think that, sometimes you're on top of the world and you're like, I can do anything. And then other times when you start realizing that there's such little challenges that you have to get over that other people don't, you start to wonder if you are capable enough.
Right.
And it just was something that, in Katarina's answer that I started thinking about was, and it was something I didn't bring up earlier. And so, I have a slight speech impediment. And so with that, I've gone to speech therapy for a while. I have a slight, stutter, some other speech impediments as well. And so, with that, there are things where it's just hard for me to, speak sometimes, which is, I'm on the speech team, so it's kind of ironic in that sense. But, it's like similar thing where it's like, like your rate of speech, you slurred words, and it's like, sometimes that's just hard for me. And it's like something that, I've tried to work on for, 18 years or however long, and I've been in speech therapy. And so I think sometimes it's those little things that, while important in some senses, it's like when that's one of the main takeaways from you as a person or your interactions with someone, it's like you almost feel a little like, I don't want to say devalued, but you feel like it's a little like, like they see that aspect of you, they don't see you as like a,
right.
As a whole person.
Yeah. And I think, too, the 3 of us having invisible disabilities, sometimes people don't view invisible disabilities as disabilities. And sometimes there's almost imposter syndrome within our own community about, are we really disabled? We don't look it. And people have an idea that disability is supposed to look one way when there is no look to disability. Do you guys have any thoughts on that, as just having invisible disabilities and maybe not having those be taken seriously?
Oh, yeah, 100%. Not, as I said, I did mention like, everyone's a little ADHD, the weather's so bipolar, and I know some people say, well, that's just a joke. Unfortunately, it does further the stigma of what it is. But I would say one of the huge issues with not being taken seriously enough is that I've had student leadership people, that do work with, the student body have said to me explicitly, well, what's disabled enough for accommodations? What qualifies as disabled enough? And I shouldn't have to justify how, my everyday life is faced to get accommodations, or have to, reason out why I need help to somebody that doesn't understand. It should just be accepted, just like everybody else is.
Absolutely.
And I can absolutely relate to the idea of like imposter syndrome and like questioning, and your own identity as being disabled, whether that be through, physical or, in our cases, invisible. I was even hesitant to agree to be on this panel in the first place because, it's like, am I really the right person to be delivering this message? And so I think, sometimes that can all, go back to the idea that everyone, kind of, I think goes back to the idea that, everyone's, a little ADHD, everyone, and then it's like, I feel like that, that hearing that makes you kind of devalue your own identity, and then it's like I feel guilty for taking advantage of the accommodations when I really, when I really come to think about it, and when it really comes down to it, that I actually need and are helpful. And so I think sometimes that has led me to trying to blend in when I should have, just embrace the fact that, there are accommodations there for a reason, and I should take advantage if I feel like I need them.
Absolutely, and I think people don't always understand that accommodations are meant to level the playing field, not to give somebody an unfair advantage. And I think oftentimes that's really misunderstood, and it unfortunately puts more burden on students to have to advocate for themselves even more, and then often to, give up some of their privacy in order to fight for those accommodations, which can be really frustrating because we have to share this identity over and over again. And this kind of goes into my next question, and we've touched on this a little bit, but what access challenges and barriers have you faced as a student with a disability, and how has self-advocacy enabled you to navigate those challenges?
I think a really challenging part about getting accommodations, especially, for the first time, I really went under the radar growing up, and especially when you are, a successful student, it's usually normalized that you're really stressed out, that you're having all these issues. So growing up, I didn't have accommodations. And so this year is the first time I've had the opportunity to receive them. And it is challenging because you have to provide a lot of evidence to prove that you're disabled enough for accommodations. One of the big things that I did this year was I took my LSAT for the first time. And to get extended time, I had to submit a doctor's note, a therapy note, proof that I have accommodations from the school, and then I had to write a paragraph explaining why I deserve this and why my abilities need to be accommodated. And then they have to approve it. So I didn't even know if they approved it until like 2 weeks later, which I shouldn't have to go through that, especially with the doctor's note, the therapist's note, the school note. It's very excessive at times to, have to say that I do need this help. And I do understand it's a really big test and it's really important, but I'm not trying to manipulate the system. I'm trying to just have an equal chance to do as good as my peers. Right. And I think another issue, on top of just all the documentation you have to do to get accommodations, I have to go to every single teacher, every single semester, and explain that I need accommodations. They send a letter to the teacher, but I still have to, sometimes I have to remind them if I still need this accommodation, because I understand, people do forget, but the fact that they send a letter, I have to go up to them, and it is sometimes excessive to have to always be like, hey, I actually don't take this test here. Hey, you forgot to put time and a half on my tests, which I've had issues with that, especially in online classes. It's really easy to just do it on Canvas, and a lot of them forget. So I'm really stressed out during a time sensitive test, and I have to make sure they email me back in enough time to fix it before the time to take the test runs out.
Really frustrating. Mm-hmm. And I think, too, going back to the amount of documentation that's needed, America's healthcare system acts more as healthcare as not a right, but a privilege. And not everybody can afford healthcare. Not everybody has access to it. And I think that prevents many people from probably being able to request accommodations because they just don't have the means to access that. So I just think that's something that we need to acknowledge and be more mindful of. Garrett, I'll let you talk now.
Yeah, so I can only echo what Katarina said about specifically about getting the documentation. I remember growing up, it was, especially when you're younger, it's hard to get that documentation, and then especially in the transition from getting from high school to college. In high school I had a 504 plan, and that's not really a thing in college, and so having to do other testing to get the accommodations in college was difficult because again, that's another doctor's appointment, that's another, kind of relating to the healthcare system as well. So I think, sometimes just getting all the documentation in order to, get the accommodations can be, taxing on yourself. And then in regards to the question that was dealing about how we have experienced. Can you just repeat the question?
Absolutely.
I'm sorry, I know.
Just access challenges and barriers that you faced as a student, and how self-advocacy has enabled you to navigate those.
And so I think, for me, I think, because of my disabilities, I operate different than everyone, a little differently than everyone else. I mean, obviously everyone has their own, ways and whatnot, but especially, the past couple of years, I've noticed, a large number of, class readings or class tests have been done on Canvas. And while for some people that can be easy and can be, more simple, for me it's really hard. It's hard for me to concentrate reading off a PDF on Canvas. For me, it's hard to, take a test online and have to, if I skip a question because I'm not sure the answer and so I want to, go back, it's hard, you have to flip the page and then it's like you have to answer all the questions on one page before. And so I think sometimes, the idea of, universal design and just saying, if I put everything on Canvas, then, it's easy for everyone to access. And, while it can be easy to, actually get the document, it's sometimes hard to read. And then I've had to, for, 16-week classes, once a week, go to the library, print it off, and then, bring it back to my dorm or whatnot, just so that way I can read the assignment for the week, because it's hard, it's hard for me personally to just read everything off Canvas. So I think the idea that, well, if I put it all in one place, if I put it all on Canvas, that all students will have access to it and it'll be easy for people to, read. And, that's just not the case. And so I think sometimes you're putting students in positions where they have to go out of their way to do something to, just be able to read the assignment for class.
Right. One of the issues I just completely remembered about is that a lot of, especially with Canvas, that's what sparked my memory, but with Canvas, a lot of teachers don't put rubrics anymore. And I struggle immensely with implicit instruction sometimes, especially when I don't have that face-to-face with the teacher, and even sometimes when I do have face-to-face instruction, the assignment is on Canvas. And a lot of the rubrics are non-existent or they're very vague. And I've had a lot of issues when I'll ask teachers, I'm like, do you want me to do this because we did it last week, but you didn't say to write this week? And then they kind of look at me or they email me kind of passive-aggressive, like, you should just know this. I don't know this. That's the issue. And it should be normalized having a rubric that I can follow so I know what you want from me and I know what you want me to take out of the assignment. Right. And I think by not having any sort of guidelines, like for my assignments, for my classes, is not just harmful for all disabled students, but just all students in general, because we should be allowed to know what we're being graded on, because how are you supposed to succeed if you don't know what standards you're supposed to meet?
Absolutely, I agree with that. And Garrett, one thing you mentioned that I'd just like you to expand on, you mentioned universal design. Can you speak a little bit more to that?
Yeah, I think, I think with, even in classroom settings, it's the idea that, if it, like it's going to work for, one person, it'll work for everyone. And I think, not that you necessarily have to tailor to every single individual's like best ways, but I think, many times it's just been, I think the primary example has really been, Canvas has been, and not that Canvas is a bad site, but just the idea that, putting it on this one level playing field, is easy for everyone. And so I think, the idea that you're not, by doing something, you're not always making it easier for everyone. You could be making it harder for someone. And so, obviously I can't speak to physical disabilities much, but, I think, there are certainly aspects in that way too, and go that way as well.
Yeah. Universal design for learning is something that's becoming more prevalent, and that's, including like accommodations and accessibility built into the class. So not only disabled students benefiting from it, but all students can benefit from that.
One thing I didn't even think about this, on Canvas sometimes they're timed tests. And it goes back to, I've used it a couple times, but I do have extended time on tests. Mm-hmm. And so when a test or quiz is conducted through Canvas, it's one way. So, you really can't take advantage of that time. There have been times or sometimes in classes where maybe you go to, another website to get a certification, or you go to another website to do a test that way, and then those websites are also, time-wise, or, and so then it's like you really can't take advantage of that accommodation because it's done through the universal way of Canvas. Mm-hmm. And so, I think Canvas is a very helpful platform in terms of, learning and whatnot, but I think, for, to say, oh, I'm putting an assignment, I'm putting the quiz on Canvas, I'm putting the final exam on Canvas, because, you can take it whenever and when, but then it's like, well, if I need to take advantage of that, extra time and a half, how do I can't take advantage of that. Yeah. So now I have to, deal with it. And so, and it's one of those things where, sometimes, the time and a half, sometimes just knowing I have the time and a half is enough. I might finish in, if the test is 30 minutes or whatnot and I get, 55 minutes, I may finish in, 29 minutes, but the stress of knowing that I only have 30 minutes is damaging to my ability to take that test.
Yeah, absolutely. And what advice would you give to other disabled students who are trying to kind of build their self-advocacy skills and maybe even their disability pride?
Oh, that's kind of a tough one. I think something important is that you should stop thinking that, well, maybe you're good enough that you don't need accommodations, is that it is your right to have accommodations, and it doesn't matter if you think you're doing well enough to not, take advantage of the opportunity you have. You should do it because you deserve it, and you deserve to have that equal playing field, even if you're, feel like you're doing great in school. That for me, I'm a decent student, and then when I got accommodations, it opened up a field of being able to perform at a level I didn't know I could before. And I think a lot of students don't even realize that that's possible because they feel like, well, I'm doing okay enough. And it's important to just get those accommodations and stand your ground and don't let anybody make you feel like you shouldn't use them.
Right, absolutely. And I think it's better to have them, and if you need them, cool, use them. If not, they're there when you need them, rather than not getting them at all. Absolutely. Garrett?
Yeah. I would say, it's easy. It's easy to say, be open about it. And so I understand that sometimes that is a process. But I think, if you, start thinking about if you can start to be more open about it, because I think I have found that the more I have been open about, identities of myself, the more comfortable I've had with those identities in the first place. And so I think, most people, I think, are going to be, at least I hope most people are going to be accepting. And so I think, if I had to give advice, is just to, try to open up, to the extent that you can to other, to other people. Whether that's just to a friend, if you're not ready to go to your professor right now, maybe it's just to a friend, or if it is to your professor, go that way. And so I think that'd be one piece of advice. Another one, I think it kind of touches on what Katarina said and what people have others said, is that try to not. Again, it's easy to say, it's easy to say, maybe not hard to act on, but don't be afraid to take advantage of the accommodations. You have them for a reason, or you have the option to get those for a reason. And so I think, trying to blend in or trying to, just make it work, may work for this assignment, may work for this test, but at some point it may not work. And then, what are you going to do? So I think, I think my advice would be to, in that respect, would be to, don't be ashamed into, saying I need to take the time and a half for the test. Don't be ashamed to, to whatever your accommodations are. If you have them, don't be ashamed to, say you need them. And if, a lot of times I found that, saying it, during class is something I'm still trying to get more comfortable with. So that's something where I may send an email to the professor, or I may try to talk to them after class and say, okay, I want to take this test at the ARC for, So I think find ways that you can feel comfortable with yourself and then act on those ways.
Great advice. Fabulous advice. And let's switch gears now. What advice would you give to instructors who are working with students with like a disability like yours, or with any disability?
I think just the simplest thing to say would be believe them. Because I think a lot of instructors have made their, they've set their class up a certain way, and they've been doing that way for years and years and years, and they're like, well, it's been fine this whole time. But realistically, it's just likely that they didn't see how it could be affecting people. And when somebody speaks out, it's like, hey, this isn't working. Could I get some help? Could I get some accommodations so I can succeed in this class too? Sometimes they're like, well, it's been fine. It's always worked this way. And it's really invalidating, especially for students who haven't gotten accommodations yet. I know I've had some peers that have, through my job, I do talk to like first year students, and so if people do need help, they contact me and I can direct them in the right way. I've had some students reach out and they're like, can I even get accommodations for this? Or someone's like, I just started a new medication, I'm really tired, can I get help for this? And as a teacher, you have to, a teacher, professor, any professional role, you need to believe those people because they're being vulnerable to you and they're asking for help because they're showing that they're not trying to blow off your class. They're not trying to blow off their job. By reaching out to you and asking for help, they're showing that they care about it and they're passionate and want to succeed.
Absolutely.
I think for me, again, I can echo what Katarina said. I think certainly, believe them. And I also think, just try to be as flexible as you can. I understand there might have to be certain standards for your class or whatnot, but I'm not taking my accommodations to take the test longer because I want an edge. I wouldn't, we're not trying to work around the system. I think we're just trying to, get what we need, get what we need. So I think my biggest piece of advice would be to believe them, but also to try to be as flexible as possible and understand that the student would not be in your class if they didn't want to learn the class material.
Absolutely.
So there's a reason that they're still in this class, come time for the midterm, come time for, when it's, week 6. There's a reason they're still in this class. There's a reason that they're, here, and it's because they want to learn. They just might need a little bit of help. And so I think trying to be as flexible as possible so that way the student can achieve those learning outcomes that you set out for them. So like I said, it's just the ways in which those students achieve those might just be a little different compared to student A to student B.
Right, absolutely. And touching on this, I know that it can be challenging to find the time and the resources to train faculty and staff on disability inclusion and allyship. But why do you think that's important? And do you feel that instructors have enough knowledge on disability, or do you think that can be improved?
I think they 100% do not have enough training whatsoever, in the sense that a lot of professors are finally getting, other types of like inclusion training, and oftentimes, especially like invisible disabilities, get left out of that. Mm-hmm. And I think while it could be inconvenient, it's not inconvenient to me, and my life shouldn't be inconvenient, because by not doing that training and not trying to learn about your students, you are hurting, current students, future students, and what was the rest of the question?
Oh, just
I just totally went off.
But why allyship and disability inclusion training is so important? I think you addressed it pretty well. And Garrett, what about you?
So I would say that I kind of agree with Katarina that I think there is still much room for improvement in terms of understanding and training for those invisible disabilities. Mainly, I think the words are coming to me. Hold on, but I think that in instances where I may not, because teachers probably have had students that have some, invisible, disabilities, but they just haven't, said anything. Mm-hmm. But that doesn't mean that student doesn't have them. Mm-hmm. And so I think, there have been times where, maybe I take a class with a professor that, the, extra time on tests or other thing may not be necessary, but maybe for, a class in a year or two from now, that might be necessary. And so I think, understanding that, certainly understanding where people are coming from, and understand that you've probably had students that have invisible disabilities, but just haven't said it because they didn't feel they needed to use any accommodations, or because they weren't comfortable telling you. I think that I think that also could open the door to students being willing to say, open up about those invisible disabilities.
Yeah, absolutely.
A thing that I always, especially with students that haven't come forward yet, I think especially, in the professional world, disability is treated like a dirty word. Mm-hmm. in the sense that, I'll go up to a teacher after class and I'm like, hey, I need to talk my disability accommodations. They're like, your disability accommodations? Let's go over here. Let's step outside. Let's talk about it. And I'm like, it's my identity. It's not a dirty word. I'm not needing to hide it. And by perpetuating that idea of that, you have to take outside, you have to whisper really quiet, or you just have to avoid the word altogether when talking about accommodations, it's perpetuating the stigma that it is a bad thing and it's a wrong thing, and being different in that sense is dirty.
What a great point. I think there's been a really big push in recent years to recognize that disability is not a dirty word. Disability is a unique part of diversity, and the more that we say disability, the more we remove the stigma from it. Differently abled? No. Special needs? No. Disabled, there's nothing wrong with it. And if we begin, especially with young children, if we use those words and call disabilities superpowers or differently abled or whatever, it makes them not feel the sense of pride in their identity that they should. And it creates internalized inferiority and shame that really we don't need, right? We need pride and we need acceptance. And so I love that you brought that point up. Thank you so much for touching on that. I also want to touch on this is one of my last questions, finding a sense of community for all college students is really important, but especially for disabled students who often feel really isolated. Have you found a sense of community on campus with other disabled students?
No.
No?
And that's just the simplest answer I can give is that, I have, the disability counselor, and she's wonderful. I love her. But the problem is that's kind of where it ends. We don't have there's nothing given to us of like, hey, here's some other students you can reach out to.
Right.
So you don't even know, sometimes, he's my coworker, and we're on this panel together, and we didn't know. And it's one of those things because we don't have any place to go find community. And I think that would be really important to, in addition to, giving academic counseling when it comes to disabled students, you should be like, hey, we also, not like a support group, but, here's somewhere where you can all meet other people that are just like you. If you guys want to, get together, we can talk about your experiences and what can we do to make the school better.
Right.
And how, what can you do to just enrich your own life with other similar people? Yeah. And I think that would be an important thing because I haven't found that kind of community, and I think we really should find a way to make that happen.
What about you, Garrett?
Yeah, I would say that I really have not found a community in terms of with disabled students, and and like Katarina said, we worked together at FYE, and it really wasn't something that even came up there. So I think that. Obviously I have my support system, through the ARC, through, the ADA coordinator, through, academic counselors. But that's, once I, leave that room and I, walk out of, and I walk out of Loretto Hall, I really don't. And I think, and I'm sure there's lots of students, that have, similar experiences to us that, we just don't know. Right. And so especially tying a little earlier because it doesn't come up and because people are afraid to talk about it. And so I think it shouldn't be something that we kind of have for the select group of people, but you can only talk about it when you're in this scenario. Right. I think finding ways to have some sort of disability awareness a little more. Is extremely important and something that hasn't really been focused on.
Absolutely. And I think when you have these invisible disabilities, again, you don't know who else has it. And you can feel isolated and feel like I'm the only student that's going through this. But when you can build fellowship with other people who are going through similar experiences, I think it makes kind of managing these challenges a little bit easier, knowing you're not going through it alone. And there's power in numbers. So the things that you see on campus that you want to change, I think it's easier to do that when you have kind of a group of people with you that say, no, this person's not lying, I'm experiencing the same thing, it is an issue. So thank you guys for sharing that. What can DE&I efforts do to center disabled voices more and to make you feel more included in diversity efforts?
I would say just like in any, aspect to try to diversify, the university and, the professional workplace is that people who haven't experienced these issues shouldn't be the ones making the final decisions. And I think that comes, in just most scenarios of where there is a minority group of people, is that you need to stop silencing their voices because it's inconvenient for you to ask them. Because you don't want to face that, maybe there needs to be big changes. And maybe, you have been excluding people and you don't want to face that truth. And so if you want to better your community, you need to start talking to the people that are directly impacted by these situations and ask them how to make it better, not just ask, a neurotypical person, well, what should we do? And that's how we end up with, activist hate groups that people don't even realize, like Autism Speaks and such, that are completely ableist and are considered by a lot of the neurodiversity community a hate group. But a lot of people don't know that, because the problem is the neurotypical people are the ones trying to make decisions for disabled people.
Great point.
Yeah, and I would say, I think, I think one of the first steps is, I think, including disabled voices in that discussion. Obviously there's a lot of, important groups of people when we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so I think, especially because there can certainly be a lot of intersectionality between the two. I think there can certainly be intersectionality there. And so I think, making sure that in diversity, equity, and inclusion, discussions, whatnot, that, disability is not, left out of that, especially because, like I said, it affects many people, and I think it's certainly a part of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and I think sometimes it's a little less under discussed in those circles.
I wouldn't say a little less. Yes. I'd say it's often forgotten. It's often that forgotten identity, and it is intersectional, and every other identity can fall into this category too. And so I think to really validate everybody's identity, you need to include disability in that conversation. I see we've got some questions online. One is, when it comes to college or a work environment, what tools, supports, and messaging made you feel welcomed and safe?
That's an interesting way. When I transferred to Webster last year, and I probably didn't start feeling welcomed and safe until this semester, or maybe just the start of last semester, because my first experience, this is before I started my first day of classes. It's a staff member who's no longer with us, but when I was talking about accommodations and I said I need some help, they're like, "You're not blind. I don't think you need all of this. You're not blind. You don't have anything physically wrong with you." And I stuck with Webster. I'm here today, which I'm glad I did. I really do love being here, but I think that's really intimidating for some students. And now that I'm working with a lot of the new staff members at the ARC and the disability office, I do feel really welcomed because they take time. Carla Grundy, I talk to her once a week, and she was like, "How's it going? Is there anything I can do that would make your life a little bit easier, and how can we make that happen?" And I think it's important to have people like that working, and people that want to change and not just want to have a title. And I think having staff members like Carla has really made Webster a safer space for me.
That's great. I'm glad that she's here to help you. I think we need more staff members that are like that and in tune with the disability experience.
Yeah, I would say for me, fortunately, I actually think it happened the first time I actually visited Webster, which was kind of interesting. I had my first campus visit, when I was it was over the summer in between. I was going into senior year of high school or whatnot, and then I actually met with the ADA coordinator that day, and I forget who it was. I think we've had a couple. We've had 3 or 4 in my time span of being at Webster, and so. But having that conversation, when my first campus visit was really helpful, and it made me trust. It made me have a little more trust in Webster, and I think we still have room to go. I think we definitely have room to go. I think sometimes the conversations get started, but sometimes they're not always executed quite perfectly. But I think in my personal experience, pretty soon as I got to Webster and eventually committed or whatnot and followed through with registering. was put in contact with the ADA coordinators pretty early on. But from there, I still think, kind of referencing back to the earlier question, I think we still have some room to grow.
And I kind of want to open it up to the audience that's present. Does anybody have any questions for our panelists?
Looking to the future, how would you translate your invisible disability into how you will need to address those when you get into the work environment outside of the academic institutions?
I think that's a really good question, and I think that's oftentimes overlooked, especially as even people who don't get accommodations when they go to college, that people think they're out of school. They don't need accommodations anymore. And I think it is a hard topic to talk about to employers specifically, because you don't want them to view you as, I'm not as competent. But, you have to just say, I need these accommodations. Maybe like if I'm sitting down for hours, I need to get up and walk around, sometimes, a 15-minute break. I mean, obviously, I'm talking more of my experience, not working in a very adult environment, I would say. But I think sometimes you have to remember that you do have to say, I need these accommodations. I need to, take a mental break, or you shouldn't penalize me if I have to go to the doctor. And I know a lot of people in the workforce sometimes, not everyone's fortunate enough to be allowed to have sick days or have paid time off. And that is a huge aspect of my life, and I shouldn't be expected to lose a day of pay just because I need to go to necessary medical treatment or an appointment, etc.
I would say for me, it's a very good question. I think it's a question that, even I myself struggle with, because, I think it also stems from part of, the idea we talked about earlier with, not wanting to talk about disability, that sometimes that hurts disabled people too, because they don't know how to talk about it, when it comes to, looking at, professional experience, as a junior, I'm, looking at, internship applications and whatnot, and even just poking around at, full-time job applications to see what kind of requirements they want that I should look for in classwork and internships. And a lot of times you see on those, check if you're, if you identify as disabled. And I always pause there because I don't know what to say. It's like, well, the answer is yes, but is that going to negatively impact my chances at, getting this internship, especially whenever, you just have the application, you read it, it's like, because there's not really a picture of you, or because you haven't had that, personal interaction, they may not know what it is. And so I think it's something that we still have a long way to go to learn, even as disabled people ourselves.
And I'm glad you asked this question, because I'm going to use it as a shameless plug. I coordinate Access U, which is a free career development program for college students with disabilities, to help them understand when it's appropriate to discuss with disability with an employer, how to go about those conversations, how to request accommodations in the workplace. We also do everything like a traditional career office would, helping students prepare for interviews, write resumes and cover letters, make sure they're connecting with inclusive employers who recognize disability as a part of diversity. And what we've seen in probably the last 5 to 10 years is that employers recognize disability as a unique strength and as an asset in the workplace. People with disabilities are really adaptable, they're fabulous problem solvers, and so companies are reaching out to us wanting to connect with our talent. So I just want you, any students that are listening, if this is something that is a concern to you, if you feel nervous about finding an internship or finding employment, there are programs out there like Access U to assist you with that. So if you're interested, accessu.org, accessu.org. I just had to do that. Any other questions? Yes.
My name is Leslie Stone, and I work for the YWCA in St. Joseph. And I just wanted to say, well, let me give you a little story. I have severe rheumatoid arthritis, and I'm blessed to have an employer who actually embraces that. I mean, if I'm having trouble walking up the stairs, what kind of accommodations can I, provide for you? And I'm thankful for that. However, on the flip side, I guess my question is to you is that you say that the word disability can be used as kind of a dirty word, right? And so in our line of work, and probably a lot of people in this room, we have to deal with clients and HIPAA laws. So how do we make disability not a dirty word that people can freely talk about their disabilities? Like I feel like I can tell anybody about my disability. It doesn't bother me, right? But there are some people that either don't want to talk about it or they're afraid to talk about it because it is a dirty word. So how do we get past the HIPAA laws and make it okay for disability to not be a dirty word? Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. That is definitely a very heavy question. It's a lot to take in. I think the first step, you don't obviously have to make anybody give their information, because obviously people do have to disclose a lot of stuff voluntarily, but just start off making your workplace very clear that, it's a safe space. You don't have to disclose your identity if you don't want to, but if you do need an accommodation, you believe that they're there for the right reason, which is obviously really hard but it's important to remember that people who do need accommodations are not trying to manipulate the system. And they shouldn't have to prove, to the extent of turning in papers and stuff if they don't want to, that they should get help. And as I said, I know that's really tough to do that, especially, with HIPAA. And, but I think it's one of those things is they have to put trust in you, but you also have to put trust in them so you can make them feel comfortable without having to disclose anything they don't want to.
I just think that my employer wouldn't have known, it's
Right.
like you said, it's an invisible disability to where, most days I look,
Right.
I guess, quote unquote normal, for lack of a better word. But, there are some days where I can't even walk.
Right.
So, in those days I would probably just call in if I wasn't able to communicate with my employer. So I was just curious about that, but thank you.
If I could, I'd like to address that question. That's, I was a former grade school principal, and, that word disability, it's just a problem. Words have images. To me, it's time to get rid of that word, change it. For instance, kids love superheroes. Make it X-ability. For S for Superman, make it S-ability. I think you have to change the word. Look at all the words that start with dis that are not good. Disagree, disease, disgusting. I mean, all those words you're fighting uphill. I think I have a grandchild who's has a disability, which I don't think is a disability at all. He made a basket right at the end of a game, and the whole place went crazy over it and stuff. But I think it's time that word just does not reflect the two of you up there or anybody else that has those things. To say that it's dis, no matter how you package it, it's something that goes in the wrong direction. You have to spend, like you were just doing now, 5 minutes to explain back, no, it doesn't really mean dis, it means change it. And I think we have so many words now that you put one letter in front of the rest of it and stuff in the tech age and stuff. So whether it's S-ability, K-ability, something, but I think it's time we need to get off of that word and say what people like you really are. You have a special ability, S-ability. So that's my sermon on this, sorry.
Who wants to respond first?
I can make sure we can both respond.
If you want to respond first.
Okay. I think that is an interesting perspective for sure. I think the disability movement is we're trying to reclaim that word. And in a sense that, I do have a biological difference that's not functioning the same. So I do understand your perspective completely, but I think it's also the disability pride is trying to reclaim a word that's been used to put us down and try to change it into a word that makes us proud. And I know personally, in my circles, I try to use the word neurodiversity instead of, I use the term neurotypical and neurodiverse often to showcase that, just because there is something different doesn't mean it's necessarily bad. And I know a lot of different groups are trying to incorporate that word to show that, there is neurological diversity in the world, but that doesn't necessarily make it a bad thing. So I think it's a tricky thing to change in the sense that, we want to take pride in who we are, but, we don't want people to look down on us because they think, we're broken, we're different, we're not supposed to be like this.
Yeah, again, I feel like I've been saying this a lot, but so I think I can really echo what Katarina said. I certainly think that's a interesting perspective, and I can see where I can kind of see that, but I do definitely think that in terms of because a lot of times in the past disability has been used as a certainly a negative connotation, if not used as an insult or used as other things. I think there is a little bit of just trying to be comfortable in that word, because a lot of times, especially for most of my life, I haven't, and I don't even know if I would say I would sitting here on the stage today. But so, and I certainly agree with Katarina that I think I've started to use neurodivergent and neurotypical as well. So I think those are some terms that could also be useful as well.
And I think that oftentimes the call to not use the word disability comes from people who aren't disabled, whereas many who I know in the disability feel a lot of pride in their disability and don't mind the term. And so I think we need to recognize who that messaging is coming from. And I also think people don't always recognize the medical model of disability versus the social model. The medical model says disability is something that is in you. It's something that must be cured or fixed for you to participate in society. We've shifted from that model. We as disability rights activists believe in the social model of disability, which says to us, disability is natural, it's neutral. If you grow old enough, you're likely going to become disabled. That's just a unique part of life. And it's not your medical differences, so to speak, that make you disabled. It's an inaccessible society that disables you. And so that's why we're trying to reclaim that word. And use disability, because we're not disabled if we have the accommodations and the access we need, right? It's only when, if I don't have my glasses, sure, I can't see, but once you give me those, I'm fine. And so I don't think disability is a dirty word, and I think the more that we use it, the less shame that will be a part of that. And I think we have time for one more question.
So I heard you guys mention an ADA coordinator and disability counselor. And I was just curious as to, do those people, are they like a school advocate for you? And as opposed to having to over and over go to your professors and say, I need testing, I need untimed testing, I need this, I need that. Is there someone that can speak on your behalf as an advocate for you, that you don't have to continue to do this every time? Or if there is an issue where a teacher has a negative comment to say, that they can go back and handle that situation? And would you have found something like that helpful in your schooling prior to college, coming up in grade school and or high school, an advocate who, not an SSD person, but somebody who speaks, or like an interventionist between the school and the parent, who can help you navigate these issues where you don't have to continually go back and forth, and to every time you have a new teacher, I have to do this process?
My counselor actually does give all my information to the teachers, but I think one of the issues with the system is that they get the information, but I'm still required to go talk to the teachers individually each semester, which I feel like kind of negates the purpose of having, a disability counselor that's there for you to do that, because the, professors still want you to individually reach out. So I think it is great to have somebody advocate for me. If I think there is an ADA violation, I will shoot her an email, be like, I think this is a violation. We talk about it. I show her any information I have and documented, and then she will handle it from there, from what she feels appropriate. So it is fantastic to have somebody like that. But I think the issue with the teacher, what you were talking about, is that it's more of a school system issue, that a hoop we have to jump through that we shouldn't have to, even though we have somebody that's doing that for us.
Sure. You shouldn't need the person to begin with, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, I, again, I think I've specified every answer. I think Katarina's exactly right when she was saying. I think, for me, I have used, the ADA coordinator or academic counseling more, as a form of support system as well. To someone who understands that some of the struggles I might be going through and can help me through that. But it really is then up to me to talk to the individual professors because while yes you get emailed the information 9 times out of 10 I have to initiate, which I think partly has made me more comfortable initiating, but also is something that I was kind of forced into, not something that I was able to develop over time.
Sure. All right, well, I think we're at time, so if we could give a big round of applause to these incredible panelists.
Such an enlightening discussion, and thank you for your willingness to share your stories. Your honesty and your transparency is greatly appreciated. If you've been inspired by their stories and would like to make a donation in support of Webster University's diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives, including accessibility resources, you can easily make a gift by scanning the QR code on page 1 in your print, as well as the online program, or by using the leaflets at the table. We're signing off for now, but we hope to see many of you back for our next session at 3:30.